A betrayal can shatter your world in an instant. This feeling of profound loss is not unique to our time. 2,000 years ago, the Roman world was tearing itself apart in a series of brutal civil wars. Friends became enemies overnight, and trusted allies suddenly became executioners. In that maelstrom of chaos, a group of philosophers discovered a way to not only survive, but to find a profound inner peace. The Stoic Seneca, who lived through this terror, wrote that difficult times can actually strengthen the soul. He said a man who is brave in the face of adversity is like gold tested in a furnace. This video will give you a practical toolkit of Stoic principles to build unshakable resilience in your own life. We will uncover how these ancient thinkers managed to see betrayal not as a disaster, but as a test of character. How did they build an inner fortress that no external chaos could breach? What does it truly mean to love your fate, even when it feels like a curse? By the end, you will have a new lens for viewing your own personal challenges and the mental strength to meet them with calm determination. What is the one challenge in your life right now that feels like your own personal civil war? For a Stoic, the first step in enduring any crisis was a fundamental shift in perspective. They drew a sharp, clear line between two realms of life. On one side are the things that are within our complete control, our own judgments, our intentions, and our desires. On the other side is everything else, the actions of other people, the rise and fall of empires, and whether we gain wealth or lose it. The philosopher Epictetus, who began his life as a slave, opened his famous handbook with this very idea. He wrote that what is up to us is our faculty of choice, our opinions, and our impulses. Everything else is not up to us. This is the core of the Stoic dichotomy of control. Betrayal, when it strikes, feels like a personal earthquake, but the Stoics would classify it as an external event, an indifferent. It is not the act of betrayal itself that causes the lasting wound, but our judgment about that act, the story we tell ourselves about its meaning. The betrayal happened. That is outside your control. Your rage, your sense of injustice, your feeling of being diminished. These are internal responses, and they are where your true power lies. Imagine a Roman senator who had dedicated his life to public service. A political shift occurs, an ally turns on him, and he is stripped of his property and exiled from the city. In the eyes of the world, this is a catastrophic loss. A Stoic in that same situation would see it differently. The loss of status and property are externals, indifferent to his character. The actions of the betrayer are outside his control. What remains within his control is his own virtue, his courage to face exile with dignity, and his wisdom to understand that his true self cannot be diminished by external events. His inner fortress remains unbreached because it was never built from stones of public opinion or political favor. Think of one recent event in your own life that felt like a betrayal. Now try to separate the event itself from your reaction to it. What parts of this situation were truly 100% within your power? The other person's choice to act as they did was not. The outcome was not, but your judgment of the event, your decision on how to respond moving forward. That territory belongs entirely to you. This is not about suppressing emotion, but about reclaiming your sovereignty over the only realm that truly matters, your own mind. What if the very events that seem to destroy us are, in fact, shaping us for a greater purpose? This is not a question of simple optimism, but the heart of a profound Stoic discipline called Amor, Fati, the love of one's fate. It is the radical acceptance of every single event, every twist of fortune, and especially every betrayal as a necessary part of the grand tapestry of your life. The Stoics saw the cosmos not as a chaotic mess, but as a rational, interconnected whole. In this providential universe, nothing happens to you in a purely random or malicious sense. Everything happens for you as a piece of material for building your character. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who faced countless betrayals and revolts, constantly reminded himself of this truth. He wrote in his private meditations, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." He saw every obstacle, every painful event, as fuel for his own inner fire, making him brighter and stronger. This mindset transforms the entire landscape of suffering. A betrayal is no longer a personal curse, but a rigorous training exercise for the soul. Consider the story of Cato the Younger, a man of unshakable principle during the Civil War. He chose to side with the Republic against the rising power of Julius Caesar, knowing full well that Caesar's victory was almost certain. When his cause was finally defeated, Cato did not see it as a tragic failure. He saw his own death as the final, necessary act of a life lived with integrity, a fate to be embraced rather than feared. His defeat was not a loss, but the ultimate expression of his freedom. He loved the fate that allowed him to die for his principles. How can we apply this to our own lives? Think back to a past personal loss, a betrayal that felt like an ending at the time. Can you now see the ways it forced you to grow? Perhaps a broken trust led you to discover a deeper strength you never knew you had. Maybe a professional setback pushed you onto a new path that was far more aligned with your true self. The practice of Amor Fati asks you to look at that painful event and, instead of cursing it, to find the hidden blessing. It asks you to love the wound that made you a warrior. This is how you stop fighting your own story and start embracing it as your greatest teacher. While Rome burned around them, the Stoics retreated to a fortress no army could breach. This was not a physical place of stone and mortar, but a sanctuary built within the mind itself, what they called the inner citadel. It is the core of your being, governed by your reason and your unwavering character, a place where the noise of the world simply cannot reach. External chaos, the shouts of the mob, the sting of betrayal, these are all outside the walls. They may rage against the gates, but they cannot enter unless you willingly lower the drawbridge and let them in. Marcus Aurelius, who spent years on military campaigns far from home, constantly fortified his own citadel. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." His meditations were not a public treatise, but a private drill manual, a series of exercises to reinforce the walls of his own soul against the daily sieges of fear, flattery, and frustration. This mental discipline is what allows for profound peace even when your world is falling apart. Consider Seneca, forced into exile on the island of Corsica by the Emperor Claudius. Stripped of his wealth, his status, and his home in Rome, he was physically banished. Yet from that remote and barren place, he produced some of his most profound letters and essays. He wrote to his mother, stating that a wise man is content with himself, even if he has nothing. His inner citadel, stocked with the resources of his own reason and virtue, remained fully intact. He was not defined by his location or his possessions, but by the unassailable character he cultivated within. So what constitutes your own inner citadel? When the political winds shift or a personal betrayal shakes your foundation, what core values remain unshaken? Is it your integrity, your capacity for kindness, your commitment to truth? Identifying these inner pillars is the first step in building a fortress that can withstand any storm. Your character, your principles, and your reasoned choices are the stones from which this sanctuary is built, a refuge that no external power can ever take from you. Stoics endured pain not by numbing themselves, but by changing their relationship with the story of the pain. They practiced a powerful mental technique we can call cognitive distancing, the act of stepping back from the raw emotional narrative we instinctively create. The goal is to see the event itself, stripped of all the judgment and drama we layer onto it. Marcus Aurelius was a master of this. He advised himself to strip away the legend that encrusts an object, to see the simple thing for what it is. The legend is the story we tell, the one filled with words like betrayal and injustice. The thing itself is just a set of actions, neutral facts devoid of inherent meaning. When a trusted friend turns against you, the raw event is that they shared private information with a rival. The legend you attach is the story of their disloyalty, the profound personal insult, the shattering of trust. The Stoic exercise is to consciously separate the two, describe the event in the plainest, most factual language possible. He told her what I said in confidence. That is the objective reality, the feeling of being gutted, the anger, the sense of a broken bond. That is the legend you are adding. By focusing only on the facts, you drain the situation of its emotional poison. The event remains, but its power to devastate your inner peace diminishes. This is not about denying your feelings, but about recognizing that the feeling is your reaction to the story, not to the bare event itself. The view from above is another way to practice this. When engulfed by the hurt, imagine rising up and looking down on the situation from a great height. From that vantage point, your personal crisis is just one small event in a vast, interconnected world. This perspective does not make the pain trivial, but it does shrink its overwhelming magnitude, returning a sense of scale and calm. Try this with a recent hurtful event in your own life. Take a moment and describe it aloud using only neutral, objective facts. Omit all labels like unfair, cruel, or devastating. What are the simple, observable actions that occurred? You may find that the event, when isolated from the story you told about it, feels remarkably different, a manageable set of circumstances rather than a world-ending catastrophe. Before a feeling of devastation could take hold, a Stoic would pause and question the initial impression. This is the core of the third great Stoic discipline, known as the Discipline of Assent. It is the practice of withholding your automatic, unquestioning agreement from the raw data that your senses and emotions present to you. An impression flashes into your mind, a gut feeling that screams betrayal, loss, or insult. The untrained mind immediately assents to it, accepting it as absolute truth and launching a cascade of emotional reactions. The Stoic, however, inserts a crucial moment of space between the impression and their reaction. In that quiet gap, reason is invited to step in and ask a simple but profound question. Is this impression not just compelling, but is it actually true? The great teacher Epictetus, who drilled this concept into his students, put it with stark clarity. He said, "Do not be carried away by the vividness of the impression, but say, 'Wait for me a little, O appearance. Let me see who you are and what you are about. Let me test you.'" He was not telling you to ignore your feelings, but to treat them as a potentially misleading report that requires verification before you act on it. Imagine a scenario at work. You walk past a cluster of colleagues who immediately fall silent as you approach. The initial, automatic impression is one of exclusion and conspiracy. The story your mind instantly writes is that they were talking about you, that you are not trusted, that you are an outsider. Without the discipline of assent, this impression takes root as fact, fueling a day of paranoia and resentment. The Stoic practice would be to consciously suspend judgment. You notice the impression, you acknowledge its power, but you do not grant it your assent. You then turn to reason. What are other, more neutral explanations for their silence? perhaps they were discussing a sensitive project bound by confidentiality. Maybe one of them just shared some difficult personal news. By refusing to assent to the worst-case scenario, you prevent a minor social moment from becoming a source of inner turmoil. This mental skill transforms you from a passive recipient of emotional storms into an active investigator of your own perceptions. So take a moment and look back on your day. Identify one automatic negative impression you experienced, perhaps a flash of irritation in traffic or a pang of insecurity from a passing comment. Can you recall the immediate story you told yourself about it? Now consciously question that narrative. Ask yourself, what is the bare fact of what happened, separate from my interpretation? What other, less personal, explanations could exist? This simple act of questioning is the very exercise that builds your inner citadel, brick by reasoned brick. In a world where fortunes could be lost in an instant, Stoics anchored their worth to something unassailable, their character. This is the bedrock of their resilience, the conviction that virtue, your moral excellence, is the only true good, and vice the only true evil. Everything else, every single external event from a betrayal to the loss of your entire estate, falls into the category of indifferent. It is not good or bad in itself, but only material for you to practice your virtue upon. The philosopher Musonius Rufus, who was himself exiled, taught that exile does not deprive a man of his virtue, but rather provides him with a new arena to display it. Your worth is not determined by what happens to you, but by how you choose to respond. A reputation destroyed by lies is a profound social injury, but it is not a moral one unless you respond with vice, with hatred or deceit of your own. The loss of friends is a painful loneliness, but it cannot corrupt your inner integrity unless you let it. Imagine that betrayed Roman politician, now living in exile on a remote frontier. His old life in the Senate, his influence, his public honor, all are gone. In the eyes of the world, he is a finished man, yet in his new circumstances, he discovers a profound freedom. He focuses on the only thing left within his control, his own character. He tends a small garden, not with resentment, but with care. He offers wisdom to the local villagers who know nothing of Roman politics. He lives simply and with purpose. The betrayal and exile stripped away everything that was not truly him, revealing the core of his virtue that no external power could ever touch. He is not a disgraced senator. He is a man living with courage and justice, regardless of his location. So ask yourself this challenging question: if your reputation was unfairly destroyed tomorrow, if everyone you knew believed a terrible lie about you, what would you do? How could you still act with integrity, with kindness, with fairness, even when no one was watching or praising you for it? Your answer to that question points directly to the strength of your own inner citadel. Stoics did not wait for disaster to strike. They inoculated their minds against it through a deliberate rehearsal of future troubles, a practice they called Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. This was not a morbid exercise in pessimism, but a profound psychological technique to strip potential future losses of their power to shock and paralyze. By confronting their deepest fears in the safe space of their own minds, they built a resilient familiarity with adversity long before it ever arrived. Seneca, in his letters to his friend Lucilius, was a strong proponent of this mental training. He advised him to periodically anticipate the possibility of exile, poverty, and even death. He wrote that we should send our thoughts ahead to face all these things, so that when they arrive, they find us already prepared and seasoned. The goal was never to live in a state of constant anxiety, but to achieve a state of unshakable calm by accepting the full, fragile spectrum of human experience. Imagine a wealthy Roman merchant whose entire fortune is tied up in a fleet of ships crossing the Mediterranean. Instead of anxiously awaiting good news, he practices premeditatio. He sits in his study and vividly imagines a messenger arriving with the worst possible report. He visualizes the storm, the loss of the ships, the complete destruction of his cargo. He does not just think about it vaguely, he feels the initial sting of the news. Then he moves to the crucial second step. He pictures himself responding not with despair, but with reasoned action and unwavering character. He sees himself calmly assessing what remains, planning his next move, and understanding that his true worth was never in the cargo holds, but in his capacity to endure this very moment. When the bad news does come, or even if it never comes, he is mentally fortified. The event loses its element of terrifying surprise. He has already walked this path in his mind and knows the way forward. What is a specific fear you carry about betrayal or loss in your own life? Perhaps it is the fear of a business partner's dishonesty or the painful end of a close relationship. Take a moment to mentally rehearse that scenario. Do not just fear the event itself, but focus intently on your response. How would you act with courage? How would you demonstrate integrity in the aftermath? By pre-writing the story of your own resilience, you are not inviting disaster, you are disarming it, ensuring that no matter what the future holds, your inner citadel will stand firm. To a Stoic, even the collapse of an empire was a small event when viewed against the vastness of time and the cosmos. This is the essence of the view from above, a mental exercise designed to pull you out of your immediate suffering and grant you a wider, more humbling lens. You are invited to rise in your mind's eye, higher and higher, until your city is a speck, your country a patch of color, and the entire earth a solitary sphere hanging in an immense, silent darkness. From this cosmic vantage point, the dramas that consume your daily life, the betrayals and the political squabbles, begin to look like the tiny, intricate movements of an ant colony. Your personal crisis does not vanish, but it is returned to its proper scale, no longer a world-ending catastrophe, but a single thread in an unimaginably vast tapestry. Marcus Aurelius constantly returned to this perspective to soothe his own imperial burdens. He wrote, "Remember how long you have been putting off these things, and how many times you have wasted your opportunities." The universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it. He reminded himself that the bustling Roman Forum, the center of his world, was merely a point on a map that would one day be dust, and that the loudest voices of his critics would be utterly silent in 100 years. This is not meant to make your life feel meaningless, but to free you from the tyranny of small-minded worries. Picture that senator, exiled and grieving his lost career. He practices the view from above. He sees the 7 hills of Rome not as the center of the universe, but as one city among countless others that have risen and fallen throughout history. He envisions the generations to come who will walk over the very streets where he once debated, completely unaware of his name or his disgrace. His personal loss, while real and painful, is absorbed into the grand, flowing river of time. Its sharp edges are softened by the sheer magnitude of everything else. What is the one challenge that feels overwhelming to you right now? Take a deep breath and for a moment, try to see it from this cosmic perspective. Imagine looking back on this very moment from 100 years in the future, or from a vantage point among the stars. How does the weight of that problem shift? Its significance may not disappear, but its power to dominate your entire inner world begins to recede, leaving you with a quieter mind and a more resilient heart. Faced with inexplicable cruelty, Stoics leaned on a profound trust in the rationality of the universe. This was their belief in the logos, a divine reason that orders all of existence. They saw the cosmos not as a collection of random accidents, but as a single, living, intelligent entity where every event, no matter how painful, is woven into a coherent and purposeful whole. The early Stoic philosopher Cleans expressed this beautifully in his hymn to Zeus, writing that no human affair takes place without you, nor in the divine cosmos nor on the sea, except what bad men do in their own foolishness. Even the actions of betrayers and tyrants were understood to be part of this grand design, providing the necessary friction against which our own virtue could be sharpened. This belief transforms random suffering from a meaningless curse into a meaningful, if difficult, chapter in a story far larger than ourselves. Marcus Aurelius constantly returned to this idea to steady his mind during the civil wars. He counseled himself to accept everything which happens, even if it seems twisted, because it brings about the health of the universe. He trusted that nature's will, the logos, was ultimately good, even when his immediate experience was one of chaos and pain. Consider the Roman soldier captured in battle and sold into slavery. In an instant, his freedom, his identity, his entire future are ripped away. The natural response is to see this as a catastrophic and pointless injustice. But a Stoic in those chains would labor to see it differently. He would strive to view his capture not as a malicious act of fate, but as a new role assigned to him by the universe itself. His purpose is no longer to be a soldier of Rome, but to be a man who endures slavery with courage, integrity, and an unbroken spirit. His new arena for demonstrating virtue is smaller and harsher, but it is no less significant. By accepting his fate as part of a divine order, he reclaims his inner freedom, finding a purpose that no slave master can ever take from him. His suffering is not erased, but it is redeemed by meaning. Can you look back on a deeply painful event in your own life, a betrayal or a loss that felt utterly senseless at the time? With the benefit of hindsight, can you now identify a purpose or a lesson that was forged in that very fire? Perhaps a devastating breakup taught you the true meaning of self-reliance. Maybe a professional failure redirected your path toward a more authentic calling. The Stoic practice is to actively search for that hidden thread of purpose, to trust that even in our darkest moments, the universe is not acting against us, but is offering us the raw materials we need to build a stronger, wiser self. A Stoic would disarm a painful event by refusing to describe it with emotionally charged words. This is the practice of objective description, a linguistic tool that saps emotional poison from any situation. The raw event itself is often a simple, neutral fact. It is the story we wrap around it, the language of betrayal and devastation that causes the deepest wounds. Marcus Aurelius constantly drilled himself in this. He advised stripping away the legend that encrusts things, to see the material and causal nature of an event. Look not at the colorful narrative, but at the plain, unvarnished facts. The sting comes from the label, not the action itself. Consider a modern scenario, a business partner who suddenly breaks a contract. The initial, emotionally laden description screams betrayal. You might say, "My partner stabbed me in the back and destroyed everything we built." This language fuels a firestorm of anger and hurt. Now apply the Stoic technique. Describe the event with clinical objectivity. My business partner sent an email on Tuesday stating they were withdrawing from our agreement, as is their legal right under Clause 7. The factual core remains identical. The action occurred, but the emotional experience is entirely different. The first description makes you a victim of a vicious act. The second presents you with a set of neutral circumstances to be managed. The event is no longer a personal attack, but a logistical problem to be solved with reason and virtue. This is not about denying your feelings, but about recognizing that your feelings are a response to the story you are telling, not to the bare events themselves. The story is something you can rewrite. Take a current frustration in your own life. It could be a conflict with a family member or a professional setback. Now grab a piece of paper or just pause for a moment and write down a description of what happened using only plain, observable facts. Omit all words that imply judgment, motive, or emotional weight, like unfair, rude, or devastating. What are you left with? You are left with the raw material of your life, ready for you to shape with your character, not your distress. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Seneca's famous words cut straight to the heart of our struggle with pain. He observed that life is long enough if you know how to use it, yet we find ourselves constantly robbed of it by misplaced priorities. We are not short of time, we are extravagant with it, especially when we lavish our most precious days upon nursing old wounds and replaying betrayals. To spend months or even years steeped in bitterness over a wrong is, in the Stoic view, a profound and tragic waste of the one truly non-renewable resource you possess, your own life. Seneca wrote that the part of life we actually live is very small, for the rest of our existence is not life but merely time. When you dwell endlessly on a past hurt, you are not living in the present, you are ceding your current moments to a ghost. Consider two Roman senators, both exiled by a political rival. The first man spends his remaining decades on a remote coast, his every thought poisoned by resentment. He meticulously relives the betrayal each day, his inner world a constant reenactment of that single moment of loss. He is, for all purposes, still living in the past, a prisoner of a memory. The second senator feels the same initial sting, but he soon turns his gaze forward. He accepts the new reality of his exile and asks himself a different question. Given that this has happened, how can I use the time that remains to me? He begins to write, to tutor the local children, to find a new purpose in the simplicity of his days. He has not forgotten the betrayal, but he has refused to let it become the central theme of his entire story. One man wasted his life, the other reclaimed it. How many hours of your own life have you gifted to a past hurt? How many days of potential joy and growth were consumed by replaying a conversation or nurturing a grudge? This is not a question meant to induce guilt, but to spark a moment of stark accounting. Was that a wise investment of your fleeting, irreplaceable time? The betrayal itself may have lasted only a moment, but the time you spent living inside it afterward was a choice. Seneca reminds us that life is not short, we make it so. We are not poor in time, we are poor in attention, squandering our focus on what is behind us instead of on the life that is still ours to live, right here and right now. Men are disturbed not by things but by the views which they take of them. Epictetus delivers this truth like a surgeon's blade, cutting to the core of our emotional turmoil. He insists that a betrayal, a harsh word, any action from another person, is merely an external event, a thing. The disturbance we feel does not live within the event itself, but in the judgment we form about it. Your peace of mind, therefore, does not depend on others behaving well, but on your own faculty of choice in how you interpret their behavior. In his Enchiridion, he offers a stark reminder. When you see anyone weeping for grief, he says, do not be carried away by the appearance that the person is in some great evil from without. Instead, remind yourself that what distresses them is their own judgment of the event. This principle applies with equal force when you are the one feeling wounded. The other person's action is their own responsibility, a reflection of their character and their choices, which are ultimately outside your control. Your judgment of their action as a catastrophic personal injury, however, is yours to manage. Imagine a Roman general revered by his troops who wakes one dawn to find that a full legion has deserted during the night. The facts are plain, the men are gone, but where does the general's true suffering begin? It erupts from his internal narrative, his judgment that this is a profound disrespect, a shattering of a sacred bond of loyalty. He feels personally diminished, yet Epictetus would argue that the desertion itself is a neutral military fact. The general's expectation of unwavering loyalty was the vulnerable point, the judgment that, when unmet, caused the devastation. His task is not to rage against the deserters, but to examine and revise his own expectation. He must see their choice as their own and focus his power solely on his own next move, his strategic response, his courage in the face of this new reality. His army is smaller, but his character can remain intact, even enlarged by this test. So look inward at a current distress in your own life, one tied to someone else's action. What specific judgment are you holding onto about what they did? Is it the story that they intended to hurt you, that their action proves your unworthiness, or that this event has irrevocably damaged your future? Can you feel the weight of that judgment, that story, as the true source of your pain? Now try to hold that judgment at arm's length for just a moment. See the other person's action as a simple fact, separate from the meaning you have assigned to it. This space you create is the birthplace of your freedom. A Stoic entered every endeavor with a silent caveat, fate permitting. This was the reserve clause, a mental safeguard that allowed them to pour their entire spirit into a task while holding the result in an open hand. They could strive with all their might for a goal, yet remain inwardly prepared for it to be swept away by circumstance, by betrayal, or by simple bad luck. It is the ultimate recipe for effort without attachment. Seneca captured this perfectly, advising us to combine intense effort with a peaceful acceptance of results. He wrote that we should conduct all our endeavors in this way, to strive for what we desire with all our power, yet to desire it only with this reservation, if nothing occurs to the contrary. This is not a half-hearted effort, but a wholehearted one that is free from the desperate need for a specific outcome. It is the difference between a sailor who expertly manages his sails and rudder, doing everything within his power to reach port, while knowing that a sudden storm may still force him to change course. His goal remains, but his peace is not contingent upon it. Imagine a politician in the final days of the Republic, campaigning tirelessly for a cause he deeply believes is just. He gives stirring speeches, he builds alliances, he works from dawn until dusk. Yet, in the quiet of his mind, he holds the reserve clause. He knows that the political winds can shift in an instant. A trusted ally could defect, a public scandal could erupt, the votes might simply not be there. He accepts these possibilities not as reasons to hold back, but as realities that free him from the crushing weight of expectation. When the defeat inevitably comes, it is not a shattering blow to his identity. He did his part with excellence. The outcome belonged to fate. His inner citadel, his sense of self-worth, was never built on the victory he sought, but on the virtue he displayed in the pursuit. Think of a goal you are currently striving for in your own life, perhaps a promotion, a creative project, or mending a relationship. Now, apply the reserve clause to it. How would your approach change if you pursued this goal with every ounce of your energy, yet fully and peacefully accepted any outcome, including total failure or betrayal? Would the frantic anxiety subside? Would a new kind of focused determination take its place? The reserve clause does not make you passive. It makes you free, allowing you to act in the world without being broken by it. What injures the hive injures the bee. This simple, profound observation from Marcus Aurelius cuts to the heart of a much larger Stoic truth. He saw the entire cosmos as a single, living organism, a vast and interconnected hive where every action ripples through the whole. From this cosmic perspective, even betrayal is not a random act of malice, but a natural, if painful, part of the social body's functioning. It is a spasm, a friction, as the organism adjusts and reorganizes itself. The emperor wrote that whatever happens to the individual is for the benefit of the whole, and that what does not benefit the hive is not good for the bee. The betrayer, in their misguided action, may believe they are serving their own good, but they are ultimately harming the collective, and by extension, themselves. They are a cell turning against the very body that gives it life. Apply this lens to the chaos of the Roman civil wars, the political betrayals, the shifting alliances, the friends who became enemies. All of this can be seen as the painful, feverish process of a vast social organism trying to find a new equilibrium. The old republic was dying, and the birth of the empire was a violent, protracted labor. This does not make the personal suffering any less real, but it frames it within a grander, more purposeful narrative. The conflict was a natural reorganization, as inevitable and necessary as the changing of seasons in a forest, even as individual trees fell. Now bring this home to your own life. Think of a personal conflict where you felt deeply wronged. Can you, for a moment, step back and see this not just as your story, but as a tiny movement within a much larger social hive? Can you consider that the person who hurt you was likely acting from their own, limited understanding of what was good for them? They were a bee, convinced it was right, inadvertently stinging the hive. This is not to excuse harmful behavior, but to understand its origin in a flawed perception of benefit. When you see the interconnectedness of all actions, your anger can begin to soften into a more profound and far more resilient understanding. The Stoics saw a barrier not as a block, but as the very substance from which to build resilience. This was an alchemical process of the spirit, turning the base metal of hardship into the gold of unshakable character. An obstacle, a betrayal, a crushing loss, these were not interruptions to a good life but the central training ground for it. Marcus Aurelius framed this with unforgettable clarity, writing in his private journal, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He did not mean that the obstacle vanishes, but that your path forward is forged by moving through it, not around it. The resistance itself shapes your strength and defines your direction. A challenge tests the integrity of your character, much like a storm tests the foundation of a building. It reveals every weak point, every crack in your resolve, not to destroy you, but to show you exactly where you need to reinforce your inner structure. Without the pressure of opposition, our virtues remain theoretical, like a sword that has never been swung in battle. It is only when we face a genuine betrayal that our capacity for forgiveness is truly tested. It is only in the grip of fear that our courage has any real meaning. Seneca is the ultimate embodiment of this principle in action. When the Emperor Claudius exiled him to the remote and rugged island of Corsica, it was intended as a professional and personal death sentence. Stripped of his political influence, his wealth, and his vibrant life in Rome, he was presented with what most would see as a devastating obstacle. Yet Seneca did not wither. He used the silence and the isolation, the very material of his punishment, as fuel for his intellect. It was in exile that he produced some of his most profound and lasting philosophical works, pouring his energy into letters and essays that would inspire generations. The obstacle became his way. His forced isolation became the quiet space necessary for deep thought and immortal writing. So look at one specific obstacle you are facing right now. It might be a difficult person at work, a financial strain, or a personal betrayal that still stings. Now shift the question. Instead of asking how you can remove this problem, ask how you can use it. What specific virtue could this very situation help you practice? If it is a frustrating delay, could it be a gym for your patience? If it is a person who opposes you, could they be the sparring partner that sharpens your empathy and your calm? If it is a betrayal, does it offer the perfect, if painful, opportunity to practice the virtue of forgiveness or the strength of unconditional integrity? Your greatest barrier might just be the raw material for your next breakthrough. To prepare for the storms of life, Stoics would willingly step into a little rain. They understood that comfort is a fragile shield, one that shatters at the first sign of real adversity. So they engaged in a deliberate practice of voluntary discomfort, a training regimen for the soul designed to build resilience against the inevitable involuntary hardships of betrayal, loss, and poverty. Think of it as forging a callus on your spirit. A callus does not make the skin numb, but it does make it tougher, less likely to bleed or bruise at the slightest impact. The Stoics sought this same quality for their inner lives, to feel fortune's slings and arrows without being crippled by them. The teacher Musonius Rufus was a powerful advocate for this training. He argued that just as an athlete must push their body to its limits in the gym to succeed in the actual contest, so too must we exercise our souls with difficulty to succeed in the contest of life. He taught that practicing poverty, for instance, allows you to truly know that you can live without wealth, dissolving the terror of suddenly losing it. This practice was never about self-punishment, but about self-liberation. It was about proving to yourself, in small, controlled ways, that you are more resilient than your circumstances. A modern parallel to this ancient training might be consciously disconnecting from social media for a day each week. This is a voluntary discomfort, a small renunciation of the constant drip of validation and the fear of missing out. By willingly stepping away from that digital noise, you are not just giving your mind a rest, you are actively building your resilience against the involuntary sting of social rejection or online criticism. You are proving to yourself that your sense of worth is not dependent on external notifications. The goal is to become the captain of a ship who has sailed through minor squalls, so when the true hurricane of a personal betrayal hits, you are not paralyzed by fear, but are already familiar with the feeling of the deck rolling beneath your feet. So what is one small, voluntary discomfort you could invite into your life this week? It does not need to be dramatic. It could be taking a cold shower, choosing a simple meal over an elaborate one, or walking instead of driving. The specific act is less important than the conscious intention behind it. In that moment of deliberate choice, you are not just enduring a minor inconvenience, you are actively fortifying the walls of your inner citadel. When you feel betrayed, who is the one delivering the verdict? More often than not, the harshest judge resides within our own mind, passing a swift and severe sentence on the person who wronged us. This is the moment for a powerful metacognitive practice, the act of stepping back to judge the judge itself. Your initial feeling of betrayal is not an absolute truth. It is a fallible opinion, a first draft of a story written in the heat of the moment. Epictetus offered the foundational insight for this entire exercise. He said, "It is not things that upset us, but our opinions about them. The betrayal is the thing, the external event. The story you tell yourself about its meaning, that it was malicious, that it proves you are unworthy of loyalty, that is the opinion, the judgment you have formed. And that judgment is what causes the lasting pain. Imagine a scenario where you share exciting personal news with a close friend, and they forget to ask you about it the next time you meet. Your initial judgment might scream that they do not truly care, that your news was unimportant to them, that the entire foundation of your friendship is shaky. This feeling of betrayal is real and painful, but now step back and judge that initial judgment. Is it accurate? Could a more charitable and equally plausible interpretation exist? Perhaps your friend was preoccupied with a crushing work deadline of their own. Maybe they had just received distressing family news and were mentally elsewhere. Your initial judgment assumed the worst about their character and their intentions. By judging that judgment, you introduce reason into an emotional storm, creating space for other possibilities to exist. Think back to a recent moment where you felt slighted or wronged by someone's action. What was the immediate verdict you passed in your mind? Now, consciously consider an alternative interpretation, one that does not cast them as a villain. Perhaps it was a simple mistake, a moment of thoughtlessness, or a reflection of their own private struggle. This is not about making excuses for poor behavior, but about freeing yourself from the tyranny of a single, painful story. By questioning your own automatic judgments, you reclaim the gavel from your inner critic and restore peace to your own court. The only constant the Stoics acknowledged was change itself. They saw a universe in perpetual motion, where every friendship, every empire, and every feeling was a temporary arrangement of atoms destined to dissolve and reform. To cling to any external thing as if it were permanent was, in their eyes, the very source of our suffering. This philosophy was not a passive surrender to chaos, but an active alignment with the deepest rhythm of reality. Marcus Aurelius, watching the endless flow of political fortunes, wrote that time is like a river made up of the events which happen, and its current is strong. No sooner does a thing come in sight than it is swept away and another takes its place, and that too will be swept away. He saw the death and rebirth of all things not as a tragedy, but as the fundamental nature of existence. For a Roman living through the civil wars, this principle was a daily meditation. Alliances forged in blood one season would shatter into dust the next. A man hailed as a hero in the morning could be declared a public enemy by nightfall. While others were emotionally shattered by these violent shifts, the Stoic observed them with a kind of sober understanding. They saw the rapid rise and fall of political factions not as a betrayal of some eternal order, but as the natural, predictable consequence of a world in flux. The Republic itself was not an immortal entity, but a phase in the long life of a people, and its end was as natural as the falling of autumn leaves. This perspective transforms how we experience loss in our own lives. We often build our sense of security on foundations we assume are solid and unchanging: a trusted career path, a lifelong friendship, a stable financial situation. But these are all subject to the same universal law of change. The Stoic practice is to regularly remind yourself of this truth, to hold every person and every possession with an open hand. This is not a recipe for cold detachment, but for a more profound and resilient appreciation. Knowing that a beautiful moment is fleeting makes you savor it more deeply, not less. So take a quiet moment and bring to mind 3 things in your life that you assume are permanent. It could be your health, your home, or a key relationship. Now look at each one and consciously reflect on its true, transient nature. Everything you love, including your own life, is on loan from the universe. This is not a morbid thought, but a liberating one. It frees you from the terror of loss by making you a wise and grateful steward of the present, fully engaged in the fleeting, beautiful now. Even the great orator Cicero was not immune to devastating loss. His beloved daughter Tullia died from complications of childbirth, plunging him into a despair so profound he fled Rome and retreated to a solitary country estate. His letters from this period reveal a man caught in the raw tension between his intellectual commitment to Stoic ideals and the overwhelming human reality of his grief. He writes of being utterly broken, confessing that all the comforts of his philosophy seemed to vanish when faced with the actual weight of his sorrow. Here was one of Rome's most brilliant minds, a student of philosophy, brought low by a personal civil war of the heart. He began writing his Tusculan disputations in part as a therapy for this pain, a series of essays arguing that virtue is sufficient for a happy life and that a wise man should be free from distress. In one passage, he states that the entire life of a philosopher is a preparation for death, a meditation on the impermanence of all things, yet his private correspondence tells a more complex story. He did not simply recite Stoic maxims and feel better. He wrestled with them, trying to fit the vast, shapeless agony of his loss into the rational framework of his beliefs. He would write about the folly of excessive mourning, then in the next breath describe the emptiness of his days. This was not a failure of Stoicism, but a testament to its real-world application. Cicero was doing the hard, messy work of using philosophy not to erase his grief, but to walk through it without being consumed. He sought solace in memory, building a shrine to Tullia, and in action, immersing himself in writing. This was his way of practicing the Stoic reserve clause, pouring his energy into a tribute to her while accepting that the outcome, his profound sadness, was part of a fate he had to endure. His journey shows that Stoic resilience is not about building a wall against emotion, but about building a sturdy vessel to carry it. Can you recall a profound loss in your own life, a moment where grief felt like the only truth? Cicero's struggle invites us to consider a different approach. Instead of trying to suppress that sorrow or letting it dictate your every action, what if you could hold it alongside a deeper understanding? The Stoic principles of accepting what you cannot change and focusing on virtuous action within your control do not ask you to stop feeling. They offer a handrail in the dark, a way to keep moving forward, one reasoned step at a time, until the weight becomes something you can carry, not something that crushes you. The Stoics saw the universe as a single, living being, where every part affects the whole. They called this profound interconnection sympatheia, a cosmic sympathy where a change in one corner of existence sends a ripple through all the others. In this vision, you are not a solitary island, but an integral cell in a vast, breathing organism. A betrayal, then, is not an isolated event. It is a local fever, a spasm of disharmony in one part of the body. Yet the overall health of the entire system, the rational logos, continues its work to restore balance. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this common nature, reminding himself that what brings you to terms with everything is the recognition that everything is interwoven and mutually supportive. The betrayer, in their misguided action, is like a cell that has turned against the body, believing its own frantic activity is for the best, while in truth it is harming the very whole that gives it life. The body's immune system, the logos, will respond not with malice, but with the inherent drive to heal and re-establish order. Think of a time you witnessed a conflict in your own family or workplace. One person's decision to act selfishly creates a wave of tension and mistrust that touches everyone. That is sympatheia in miniature. The local harmony is disrupted, but the underlying bonds and shared purpose of the group, its own small logos, will either work to mend the rupture or reconfigure into a new, stable pattern. Your personal reaction to a betrayal is not just a private matter, it is your contribution to this local universe. Do you pour more poison into the system with rage and bitterness, feeding the illness, or do you act as a healing agent, responding with a clarity and integrity that helps restore the natural balance? The next time you feel the sting of a personal betrayal, pause and consider your role in this vast, interconnected web. How can your response become a force for harmony rather than a perpetuation of chaos? The Stoic path to peace began with a ruthless audit of what they truly desired. They identified the discipline of desire as the foundational practice for an unshakable life, a radical reorientation of the heart's deepest, once away from the chaos of the external world and toward the one thing that could never be taken, a virtuous character. This was not about suppressing ambition or wanting nothing, but about wanting the right thing, the only thing that is truly and completely your own. Epictetus, who knew the sting of powerlessness as a former slave, framed this as the very essence of freedom. He taught that a man's master is anyone who has power over what he desires or wants to avoid. If you want something that is not up to you, you have instantly made yourself another person's slave. Freedom, then, is secured not by acquiring more, but by ceasing to demand that the world conform to your wishes. It is the liberation that comes from wanting only what you can already guarantee for yourself. Picture two senators at the end of the Republic. The first desires the prestige of the consulship, the roar of the crowd, the tangible power to shape history. When a rival betrays him and seizes that office for himself, the first senator is utterly shattered. His entire sense of purpose was tied to an external prize, and its loss feels like a personal annihilation. The second senator desires only to act with justice and courage in every situation, regardless of his official title. The same betrayal occurs, the same political loss. Yet the second man remains steadfast. His desire was for an inner quality, and the betrayal, while a practical setback, cannot touch it. In fact, the betrayal provides him with the perfect material to practice the very justice and courage he desires. He remains content not because he is numb, but because he possesses the very thing he wanted most, his own integrity. Take a moment and look inward. What are the top 3 things you find yourself desiring right now? Perhaps it is a specific promotion, the unwavering loyalty of a particular person, or a certain level of financial security. Now hold each desire up to the clear light of the Stoic dichotomy. Is this outcome 100% within my control? Your effort at work is within your control, but the final promotion decision is not. Your own loyalty and kindness are within your control, but another person's faithfulness is not. Your prudent financial habits are within your control, but a market crash or an unexpected loss is not. By categorizing your desires this way, you perform a simple but profound act of mental housekeeping. You begin to withdraw your emotional investment from the turbulent stock market of external events and reinvest it in the one enterprise you fully own, the development of your own character. This is how you disarm the world of its power to devastate you, by ensuring that your happiness is never held hostage by something you could lose. Stoicism is not a fortress built for one. The inner citadel was never meant to be a solitary prison, but a secure command center from which to engage with the world. This philosophy of profound self-reliance is also a profound call to duty, a commitment to serve the human community even when that same community has betrayed you. The Stoic concept of oikeiosis describes our natural impulse to care for others, starting with ourselves and expanding outward in ever-widening circles like ripples from a stone dropped in water. The philosopher Hierocles illustrated this with his circles of concern. Imagine your core self at the center. The first circle holds your immediate family, the next your extended family and friends, then your local community, your country, and finally, all of humanity. The Stoics' task, Hierocles taught, is not to build walls between these circles, but to continually draw the outer ones inward, treating the stranger with the consideration you would give a cousin, and the citizen of a distant land with the respect you would offer a neighbor. Your duty expands with your capacity for reason. A betrayal, then, is a rupture in one of these outer circles. It is a painful tear in the social fabric, but it does not absolve you of your responsibility to the whole. The Stoic sage continues to act justly and to help others, not because they are guaranteed kindness in return, but because it is the nature of a rational being to contribute to the common good. This is resilience in action, not reaction. Consider a Stoic teacher exiled from his city by a paranoid ruler. He is physically cast out from his community, his own circle of concern forcibly pushed to its outermost edge. A lesser man would succumb to bitterness, turning his back on the world that rejected him. But the Stoic finds a new village on the frontier. He does not hoard his wisdom in resentment. He gathers the local children and teaches them to read. He offers counsel to farmers dealing with a blight. He serves the new, smaller community with the same unwavering commitment he once offered the Senate. His actions are not dependent on his status or their gratitude. They flow from his character, from an inner foundation that no decree of exile can ever shake. He draws his new neighbors inward, proving that our circles of concern are defined by our choices, not our circumstances. This week, how can you perform one small act of service or kindness, deliberately detached from any expectation of reciprocation or even appreciation? It could be as simple as a patient gesture with a frustrated colleague or an anonymous gift to someone in need. The value of the act lies not in the applause it might receive, but in the quiet affirmation it gives to your own humanity. If one man embodied Stoic resistance to tyranny and acceptance of fate, it was Cato the Younger. He stood as a living pillar of republican virtue against the rising tide of Julius Caesar's ambition, a man whose very existence was a rebuke to the corruption and decay he saw in Roman politics. Cato did not merely study Stoic philosophy, he wore it like armor, and he was prepared to die in it. His life was a masterclass in applying the discipline of desire, anchoring his deepest wants not to power or victory, but to the unwavering principle of liberty. He fought for the Republic knowing Caesar's military and political might made its defeat almost certain. For Cato, the outcome of the war was an external and indifferent. What mattered was his own virtuous action in defense of what was right. When his cause was finally crushed at the Battle of Thapsus, he did not flee or beg for mercy. He retreated to the city of Utica, where he calmly accepted the finality of his defeat. His suicide was not an act of despair, but the ultimate expression of his freedom. He chose to die as a free man under his own command rather than live as a subject under a tyrant. Contemporaries watched in awe. Cicero, though often critical of Cato's inflexibility, recognized the sheer power of his character, writing that he was a man who weighed his actions by the standard of right, not by the hope of success. Later Stoics like Seneca would hold Cato up as the very model of a sage, a man who proved that virtue could triumph even in total political collapse. On his final night, Cato displayed a profound and unsettling calm. He dined with friends, engaging in philosophical discussion. Afterwards, he retired to his room and read Plato's Phaedo, a dialogue concerning the immortality of the soul. When he was done, he took his own life. The story goes that after his first wound, his son and servants rushed in, finding him alive but gravely injured. A doctor was summoned and began to suture the wound. In that moment, Cato, regaining consciousness, chose his fate once and for all. With a final, terrible act of will, he tore open the stitches and departed this life on his own terms. His final hours were a deliberate performance of Stoic acceptance, a demonstration that his inner citadel was so secure that not even the destruction of his world and the end of his own life could breach its walls. So we must ask ourselves, looking at Cato's unwavering stand, what principle or cause in your own life would you be willing to defend with such conviction? It may not be the fate of a republic, but perhaps it is your personal integrity in a corrupt workplace, your commitment to truth in a relationship, or your refusal to compromise a core value for social acceptance. What is the hill you would choose to die on, not out of stubbornness, but out of a profound alignment with your own character? Cato's legacy is not a call to self-destruction, but a challenge to identify what is truly worth saving within ourselves, no matter the external cost. Seneca knew the depths of political disgrace and the dizzying heights of imperial influence. His life serves as a masterclass in applying Stoic principles to two of life's most extreme tests, crushing loss and intoxicating power. Banished to the barren island of Corsica by the Emperor Claudius on a trumped-up charge of adultery, Seneca faced what his society viewed as a social and professional death. Yet from that rock in the Mediterranean, he wrote one of his most moving works, The Consolation to his mother Helvia. In it, he does not wallow in self-pity or rage against the injustice. Instead, he consoles her by arguing that exile is merely a change of place, not a diminishment of self. He wrote that a wise man carries his possessions with him, for his true wealth is his virtue and his reasoned mind. He turned his forced isolation into a period of immense philosophical productivity, proving that his inner citadel was fully operational, even when his physical world had shrunk to a tiny, remote cell. Then, in a stunning reversal of fortune, he was recalled to Rome and appointed the tutor and later chief advisor to the young Emperor Nero. He was suddenly at the absolute center of power, his influence stretching across the known world. This was a test as difficult as exile, but in a completely different way. Where exile tested his resilience against humiliation, power tested his integrity against corruption and compromise. His role in Nero's court was fraught with moral danger. He amassed great wealth, which critics said contradicted his Stoic teachings on indifference to externals. He wrote speeches for Nero that often flattered the emperor's ego, and he remained in his service even as Nero's tyranny began to reveal itself. This is where we see the messy, real-world application of Stoicism. Seneca was not a perfect sage. He was a man trying to navigate an impossible situation, attempting to guide a monstrous leader toward reason while preserving some semblance of stability for the empire. In his moral letters written during this later period, we see his continued struggle. He advises his friend Lucilius on the importance of inner freedom, writing that true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future. He understood that the palace could be a more confining prison than Corsica if you chained yourself to the whims of a tyrant. So we see a consistent thread running through both his exile and his power. In Corsica, he practiced accepting what he could not change, focusing on the inner resources he still commanded. In Rome, he practiced the reserve clause, engaging fully in his political duties while knowing that the favor of Nero was as fickle as the wind. He strove to do what good he could from within the belly of the beast, even as he compromised to survive. His story challenges us to look at our own lives. Can you identify a personal exile, a period of setback or isolation where you felt cast out? How did you, or how could you, use that time to fortify your inner world, to discover the possessions you carry within? And can you identify a time of power or success, a promotion, a position of influence where you felt the pressure to compromise your quieter values? The real test of character is not just surviving the storm, but navigating the calm without losing your way. How do you ensure that your core self remains intact, whether fortune abandons you or showers you with gifts? Stoics did not forbid grief, they sought to grieve wisely and proportionally. A common error is to believe this philosophy demands emotional numbness, a cold suppression of all feeling in the face of loss. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Stoic goal was to experience natural sorrow without being shattered by it, to feel the wave of sadness without letting it pull you so far from shore that you can never swim back. They drew a critical distinction between an involuntary pang of the heart and a full-blown, soul-consuming storm. The first they called a propathia, a pre-passion, an initial, reflexive jolt of pain that is utterly human and unavoidable. The second is the passion, the destructive emotion that takes root only when our judgment assents to the initial feeling and amplifies it into a story of endless devastation. A Roman father receives the news that his son has fallen in battle. The report hits him like a physical blow. His breath catches, his shoulders slump, a cry escapes his lips. This is the first movement, the raw human response to a profound loss. It is natural and unstoppable. The Stoic practice begins in the next moment. Does he give his full assent to the narrative that his life is now irrevocably ruined? Does he surrender his remaining days to the specter of his son's death, abandoning his duties to his family, his community, and his own character? Or does he allow the sorrow its space, feel its weight, yet consciously choose to keep living a life of purpose? Seneca, in his letter to his mother Helvia, writes of mastering grief rather than being mastered by it. He argues that while tears may fall, they should not fall forever. The wise man, he says, will feel his sufferings but not be overwhelmed by them. He will mourn, but his mourning will have a measure. That father, after the initial shock, would tend to his son's memory with honor. He would speak of his bravery. He would ensure his other children were cared for. He would continue to serve his city, not because he felt nothing, but because his grief did not erase his responsibility to the living. His sorrow was real, but it was not the sole ruler of his existence. Think back to a past loss in your own life, a betrayal or a personal ending that cut deeply. Can you recall the shape and duration of your grief? Did it serve as a period of necessary mourning, a passage through a dark valley that eventually led you back into the light of your own life? Or did it overstay its welcome, setting up a permanent residence in your mind and hindering your capacity to move forward? The Stoic question is not whether you should feel pain, but what you choose to build from its raw materials. Stoicism presents a fascinating paradox: total responsibility for our inner world within a universe of divine determinism. This is the profound tension between the logos, the rational fate that governs all things, and our own faculty of choice. We are utterly sovereign over our judgments and desires, yet we are also a single thread in a vast, predetermined tapestry. How can both of these things be true at once? The great Stoic thinker Chrysippus offered a clarifying analogy. Imagine a dog tied to a moving cart. The cart is moving down a set path pulled by a powerful horse. This is the logos, the unchangeable direction of fate. The dog, however, has a choice. It can trot along willingly, keeping pace with the cart, or it can plant its feet, resist, and be painfully dragged down the very same road. The destination is fixed, but the quality of the journey, the dog's own experience of the trip, is entirely its own to determine. Your will is not being overridden by fate. It is being invited to cooperate with it. This resolves the ancient conflict between free will and destiny, making space for both intense personal effort and profound, peaceful acceptance. Your effort is your run alongside the cart, your commitment to virtue. Your acceptance is your understanding that the road itself was chosen by a rational driver. Consider a legionary in the final, chaotic days of the Roman civil wars. He controls his courage, his discipline in holding the line, and his commitment to his sworn duty. These are his judgments, his inner world. He does not control the overall strategy, the terrain, the arrival of enemy reinforcements, or the final outcome of the battle. Those are the cart moving on its set path. He can choose to be the soldier who fights with honor and accepts the result, whatever it may be, or he can be the one who breaks in fear and is dragged to the same end but with shame and regret. His freedom and his dignity lie not in controlling the war, but in how he chooses to move within it. So where in your own life do you feel this tension most acutely? Is it in a relationship you are trying to mend, a career goal you are striving toward, or a personal habit you are working to change? You control your effort, your attitude, your actions. You do not control the other person's response, the market's fluctuations, or the stubbornness of an old pattern. Are you running willingly with the cart, giving your all while accepting the road, or are you digging in your heels, exhausting yourself against a path you cannot change? Your peace is found not in conquering the terrain, but in aligning your stride with it. A Stoic treated misfortune like a locked chest, believing it contained a valuable lesson if only they could find the key. This is the disciplined heart of turning obstacles into fuel, a practice far removed from simple positive thinking. It demands a deliberate search for the hidden benefit woven into the fabric of every loss, a search that requires the key of reason to unlock. Marcus Aurelius offered this precise key when he wrote, "Everything that happens is right for the whole of nature, and if you look closely, you will find that it is so for you too." He is not saying the betrayal itself is morally good, but that the universe, in its vast and rational order, has presented you with this specific challenge as the exact material you need for your own growth. Your task is to look closely, to sift through the pain and find that specific personal rightness. Imagine a modern entrepreneur whose business partnership collapses in a bitter betrayal, leaving them with nothing but debt and a shattered reputation. The immediate experience is one of total failure, but by applying this Stoic exercise, they begin to search the wreckage. They look closely and realize their own character flaw. A tendency to trust too blindly without proper verification had made them vulnerable. The painful failure revealed this weakness, a crack in their judgment they had never noticed. Addressing this flaw becomes their hidden treasure. They rebuild their career with a new, more resilient integrity, vetting alliances with greater wisdom. The betrayal was the fire that burned away their naivete, leaving behind a tougher, more discerning professional. This is not about thanking the person who wronged you, but about thanking the strength you discovered in yourself because of them. The gift was always there, locked inside the chest of that disaster. So take a moment and bring to mind one recent setback in your own life, a personal or professional betrayal that stung. Now challenge yourself to list 3 potential gifts or lessons it might contain. Perhaps it taught you the true value of certain relationships, or it forced you to develop a skill you had neglected. Maybe it revealed a personal boundary you needed to enforce. The act of searching itself shifts your focus from what was taken to what can be built, transforming you from a victim of circumstance into an active participant in your own evolution. For many Roman Stoics, their philosophy received its ultimate validation not in life, but in the manner of their death. The final and most severe test of their principles arrived not in the Senate or the study, but in the moment they were forced to confront their own end, often at the command of a betrayer. They had trained for this their entire lives through the daily practice of Memento Mori, the remembrance of death. This was not a morbid obsession, but a spiritual exercise to strip death of its terror by remembering its inevitability. By contemplating the finite nature of existence every single day, they cultivated a profound familiarity with the idea, ensuring that when the real moment came, it held no shocking power over them. Life and death to a Stoic were the ultimate externals, the ultimate indifference. Seneca wrote that death is just not being. What that is, I already know. This was the logical conclusion of their entire worldview. If your true self is your reasoning faculty and your virtuous character, and if those are incorruptible, then the death of the body is merely the shedding of a shell, leaving the essential self untouched. The historian Tacitus provides a chillingly serene account of Seneca's final hours. ordered to commit suicide by his former student, the Emperor Nero, Seneca was calm. He did not rage or weep. He comforted his grieving friends, chastising them for giving in to emotion when they should have been fortifying their minds with philosophy. As the blood flowed from his opened veins, he continued to dictate his final thoughts to scribes. His last acts were those of a teacher, turning his own execution into one final, powerful lesson on the indifference of the body and the freedom of the soul. He met the ultimate betrayal from a man he had guided for years with unwavering composure. Another senator, Thracia Petus, also condemned by Nero, faced his end with similar equanimity. Upon hearing the Senate's death sentence, he retreated to his garden. He called for the quaestor and deliberately shed his own blood onto the ground, offering it as a libation to Jupiter the Liberator, a symbolic act declaring his soul's release from tyranny. His final words were reported to be a prayer for the well-being of the Roman people, not a curse upon his enemies. These were not isolated cases. They were the lived proof of a philosophy that worked under the most extreme duress. Their composure was not a lack of feeling, but the culmination of a lifetime of mental training, a final, graceful performance of the principles they had long professed. So we are left with a confronting question, one that tests the very core of our own practice. If you were to face your end today, what Stoic principle would you most want to embody in your final moments? Would it be the acceptance of the reserve clause, acknowledging that your life was always on loan from the universe? Would it be the discipline of assent, refusing to judge death as a catastrophe? Or would it be the simple, profound love of your fate, embracing even this final chapter as necessary and good? Your answer points directly to the next frontier of your own inner fortification. This ancient toolkit of resilience remains startlingly relevant today. We have walked through the core principles that allowed the Stoics to endure the unendurable, the sharp dichotomy of control that separates our judgments from external events, the radical love of fate that welcomes every twist as necessary, the inner citadel that guards our peace, and the alchemy that turns every obstacle into fuel. This was never a philosophy of passive resignation, but one of active, unyielding inner strength. It is a practical mental framework for building a life that cannot be broken by circumstance. Marcus Aurelius leaves us with a final, penetrating truth to carry forward. He wrote, "The universe is transformation. Our life is what our thoughts make it." Your world is in a constant state of change, just like the Roman Empire. Your life, your happiness, is ultimately shaped by the opinions and judgments you choose to hold. The challenge you face right now, whether it is a personal betrayal, a professional setback, or a private struggle, is your Roman civil war. It is your training ground, your arena to practice courage, justice, and wisdom. This is your opportunity to prove the strength of your own character. Do not let it go to waste. Choose just one practice from this journey, perhaps the morning premeditation of hardships, or the evening audit of your judgments, or simply the conscious use of objective language when you feel wrong. Weave that single thread into the fabric of your day, then share your experience in the comments below. Tell us which principle you are putting into practice and what you are learning. Let us build a modern community of practice, supporting each other as we learn to meet our own chaotic times with the calm determination of a Stoic.